here. And Zan, would you be happy to
Yes, absolutely. I will just give people, I'm doing it myself, I shouldn't need it, but just to give others the opportunity to find whakataka in our app, if you like. Anyway, so I will I'll lead with the pace and the volume and fill in behind it.
Whakataka te hau ki te uru, whakataka te hau ki te tonga. Kia mā kene ki uta, kia mā taratara ki tai. He ake ana te atakura, he tio, he huka, he hauhu, ti hei mo iora.
Thank you. So in terms of housekeeping, we do have a quorum, I'm told. Apologies from anyone.
No apologies.
Who have we got online? Thompson, Hokianga
Thompson.
online. Good morning.
And
Morena.
will join us shortly.
Okay. Thank you. Do we have any conflict of interest declarations to cover off before we start? Nope. Okay, rather than doing the minutes now, I might just move them a little later in the piece, and given that we've got our EY auditors online now, is everyone happy that we just jump to that at this point? Yes. All right, so we have our auditors online. Can you guys hear us okay?
Yes, we can, Morena.
Lorena, nice to see you.
Yes.
We've got half an hour set aside in the agenda for this item. So shall we start with you guys introducing and anything in particular that anyone wants to add on that, and then we'll go around.
Yeah, so this item is an opportunity for the auditors to share their report with the committee on the audit that they've been performing over our annual report for the year. This process has been ongoing for sort of the last month or so and is just in its finalisation process, ready for adoption next Wednesday at the council meeting on the 25th. The report and papers were written obviously a week or so ago, and there has been further work and updates since then, which I'll sort of let the auditors speak to as they speak to their report. So over to David and Ahmed.
Thanks, Chelsea. And we can be reasonably brief from our perspective, but then obviously very happy to take questions that the committee has. I'll cover a little bit of general context, and then Ahmed will touch on one or two points of detail that are effectively a bit new or different this year. In terms of the context that I'll cover, I'll mostly comment on page 3 of our report, which is the executive summary of our report. And as a starting point, wanted to acknowledge that it's been a really challenging year for the council, particularly in respect to dealing with the implications of Cyclone Gabrielle, and wanted to take the opportunity to thank council staff for their support through the annual report and the audit process. It's been a year where there's been competing pressures, and the circumstances have also created more complexity in the financial reporting as a result of significantly increased costs and also increased revenue as a result of the funding arrangements and the insurance. So the time and effort that council staff have put into supporting us through the process is very much appreciated. In terms of the audit status, you'll see on the left-hand side of that executive summary, when we issued our report, there were 17 open items. As Chelsea alluded to, work's been undertaken since that point in time, and as at today, there are 9 items remaining. 3 of those items are formalities, so simply the signing of the annual report, the signing of the representation letter, and us completing our subsequent events work up until signing date, and the residual items we're working on closing those out over the coming couple of days. In terms of the audit differences that are mentioned in the top right of that page, I guess that's acknowledging that there are no unadjusted audit differences. So we identified 5 audit differences on the way through and completing our audit work. Those are summarised on page 12, and all of those will be reflected in the final version of the financial statements. The last piece that I wanted to touch on briefly before I let Ahmed touch on a couple of points of detail was really the audit opinion itself, in terms of there will be 2 elements of that audit opinion that are effectively non-standard in nature. The first of those is an emphasis of matter that highlights some of the uncertainties relating to measuring the greenhouse gases reported. And that approach is consistent with all other public entities that report on their emissions in their annual report. So that's a common emphasis of matter. The second matter that will be non-standard is specific to Hawke's Bay Regional Council. And it's a qualification relating to the fair value of infrastructure assets. And it's really a result of both the circumstances in the current year and the fact that a valuation of those assets wasn't undertaken as at 30 June. And I think on that point, we completely understand and appreciate the rationale for choosing to take that approach, and it makes sense to us. It's really just making sure that the implications of that are clear to readers. And I think the starting point for that is it's well explained in the infrastructure asset note in Council's annual report. And then on top of that, we'll just add our view in the audit opinion itself. Ahmed, do you want to touch on a couple of the more relevant points of detail?
Sure. Thanks, Dave. And I'll come into page 6 of the close report, and really that page covers and funding and that the council have received during the period. So council has played a significant role this year in terms of both coordinating the funding for responding to the cyclone, and as well as also reconstructing some of the damage that have been done to infrastructure, and in particular through significant funding have been obtained during the year with respect to silt and debris. One is for local authorities and the other is for commercial entities, and large amount of the local authority funding have been either distributed or spent by the council at 30 June, and the remaining balance sits on the balance sheet. And I think the commercial entities amount, that's still kind of an early stage of the process. And the council is still processing the applications and in terms of making sure that the entities that have applied and meet the criteria that are required. And our audit really has focused on the recognition of that amount, of those funds, and auditing standard requires that for us to consider that, but also the key element that we spend a bit of time on is, and whether the grant should be booked as a revenue or whether it should be deferred on the balance sheet. And the most determining factor to that really is whether there's any return obligations to the fund providers, and that's have been where we spend most of our effort as part of the audit. And the other area I want to really cover is the report on control findings section of the report, which is page 13. And in there we highlight some of the areas we think an improvement will happen. It's good to note that there are no high rated items, and there's only one moderate rated item, and that really relates to some improvement that needs to be done around the record keeping of the community loans, which managements are working on, and then the remainder are really around housekeeping items in terms of improving and enhancing existing processes, and most of those are low rated items. That's, I think, pretty much what I wanted to cover in detail, but happy to take specific questions if the committee has any.
Okay, thank you. I did have a couple, and just to pick up on David's point around the Hawke's Bay Regional Council specific aspect being non-standard around that valuation of infrastructure assets. There are other local authorities dealing with similar sorts of issues around the country. My query is, in terms of the approach around the valuations and the impairment and uncertainty and so forth, can you give us any indication as to whether other authorities would be having a consistent kind of approach with what's happened here?
I think it varies council to council. And the other point I think as well is a lot of the other impacted councils are district councils rather than regional councils, and they have assets of a different nature. So I personally work with another district council that is impacted, so they considered this matter with respect to their roading and the pipe networks as well. In that case, they did value both of those classes of infrastructure assets, and that was a choice they took because of the nature and the quantum of the damage. So I think it'll vary, and it'll be council by council, and it will be driven by both the level of damage and also the nature of the assets.
Thanks. On the controls, you've said that the detailed report on the control findings is going to be prepared and distributed. Will that come to this committee? And when would that be? Is there a time frame on that?
The next
Should be the
meeting.
next
Yeah,
meeting.
the next meeting.
Okay.
And that will come with the control findings, including proposed actions that we will take and timeline on that, similar to last year. Yeah.
Okay, thanks. If I can go around the table, Councillor Harding.
Kia ora, Chair. Look, I've got a couple of questions, so if you bear with me, hopefully. The first one is just, and this is probably a question that maybe our Chief Executive will answer rather than the auditors, but the question is, so we understand from a financial point of view that there's a qualification on the accounts, or there will be, in relation to the non-evaluation of the assets. Is there an operational risk to the business of the council through not having done that job of work? And I believe the answer is no, but it's an obvious question that should be asked, so I'm asking it.
To my mind, there isn't. I think the job we've got as we rebuild our assets and complete the construction of those assets would be to move and get that valuation done, perhaps out of cycle with when we would traditionally do it. But I think that would cover off any potential operational risk. I will look to our CFO for any qualification on that.
No, I think in terms of operational risk, I think there would have been more operational risk in trying to divert experts to revaluing assets rather than getting them fixed up and everything. So I think we've done the right thing operationally in there. And as Nick has mentioned, Chief Executive mentioned, we would look to actually revalue those assets at the earliest opportunity once the fixes have been done and we can actually get in and make an assessment, and that could be next year.
Thank you. So to the EY team, please, if I can take you to page 6 of your report, and just a couple of questions. First one relates to external funding, and you note towards the bottom of the left-hand side, 5 million coming in from MPI for woody debris clearance. Can you just tell us whether that was fully spent? Is it balance date or not, please? And you might not be able to tell us now, but if we could just fill in that bit of information at some point, please.
Yeah, I think the answer to that is bulk of that funding has been receipted, I think, and post balance sheet, so not before year end, and so it hasn't been spent and at that time.
Yep, and I asked the question, and because it's, for two reasons. One is it's quite difficult to keep track of all these flows in and out. The other thing is that of the other, the things that you list there, you were much more specific about what the fate of funds or the timing of the funds, whereas that we didn't have that level of detail for the 5 million. So it would be good to know. My other question, and it arises in relation to a paragraph on the right-hand side, halfway down, noting that regional council is responsible for allocating and ensuring funds provided to other entities spent on approved purpose. My question is around the risk to the council of misapplication of those funds that it is administered, and whether there is a risk back to the council or a contingent liability back to the council in the event that there has been misapplication of those funds. And nothing in this question should be taken as an indication that I believe there's been any problem in the processes that the council has been involved in. And in fact, I believe they've been very robust. And I've been deeply involved in some of them. But there is a question about risk back to the council, and I am assuming that it's covered off in the legal agreements we have with the funders, but I'd like to understand that, please.
Can I, through you, Chair, can I answer that? So thank you, Zan, great questions, and I thought that you might aim for that paragraph today. That is a valid question that you've asked. There is limitations of risk in both programs. So where we look at the local government fund, which is funding through the SILT task force, there is obviously criteria in place around how that's spent. For advice to this committee, we are currently looking at a piece of work to provide assurance over the activities that have happened in that SILT task force to validate prioritisation, eligibility, etc., spend on and accountability. That piece of work will trigger quite shortly. There is limited risk in there because we are administering that as an organisation. We have control over the contractors and we have control over the process through the SILT task force. So there is confidence and limitations of risk. Where there is risk to this council, reputationally and potentially what you were talking about contingent-wise, is the commercial SILT. So as the administrator of the program, commercial SILT providers must use the money that they have been granted on the purpose that they said they were going to, else that money needs to come back to the council in June next year. Now, when an applicant signs into the grant agreement, as you've pointed out, they are providing a rep and warrant through the application process that they haven't, everything they're doing is at arm's length, must be used under eligibility, etc. They also sign into a grant agreement with us that has legal terms in that to say they will spend the money, etc., normal contractual terms. There is still a risk that they won't do that. And under the agreement we have with the DIA, there is funding available to us for legal fees, should we need to take legal action next year. We have a program of work underway starting next month who are going to use auditors to validate some of those high-risk entities that we've given money to. So there's checks and balances in place, but there is still a risk that money sent to applicants to spend on remediation and commercial debris clearance is not used in line with that contract. And when we find that, we're going to have to spend money to get that back on behalf of the government. Where we can't, that contract limits HBRC to a maximum liability of $100,000 in the contract. So there is still some process to work through with DIA what we're going to do, but we're putting in place controls to at least identify that. I think it's going to be very difficult to get money back from desperate applicants who are needing that funding to pay for remediation, and they've used it in different purposes, and how we get that back might be quite difficult.
Thank you, Sue. That's a comprehensive reply. Can I just check, though, the $100,000 is for the total contract, that
Yep.
risk?
Yep.
Not individual.
Correct.
No. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further questions? Councillor Harding?
I have got one more set of questions, but I'll step back for a moment and let someone else have a crack.
Okay, we'll see if that gets covered.
I just had a point of clarification, please, on page 12, the differences. Explain to me the adjustment to correct the investment in the Food East property valuation uplift. I'm not actually sure what that means.
That is simply in the parent numbers, so for the council only, council's investments in its subsidiaries are carried at fair value, and in the initial cut of the numbers, the fair value for that particular subsidiary didn't include that uplift, and it was just a timing thing really in terms of the initial set of numbers used to undertake that calculation.
Okay, thank you.
Can I just, while we're on that, just so that I understand correctly, is that something that disappears on consolidation, or is, yes, so there's no net change to our group position? Thank you. Damn. I was hoping there was an easy 4 mil there. Good one.
Councillor Curtin, do you have any questions for our auditors?
Yes, thank you, and apologies, Madam Chair, for lateness. Connectivity was not happening as I'd hoped. And thanks to EY for a very comprehensive and easy to read report. It's a really comprehensive document. Can I just take you to two questions? Going to page 9. Sorry, page is long there. To page 7, I just want to understand a little bit more around the reduction in value for the Napier endowment properties. And I can't quite follow the logic around the reduction being due to higher interest rates resulting in a higher discount rate at the very last paragraph on the left-hand side of page 7. Can you help me understand how that transacts, what that means?
I think what basically means it's mainly the market, because of the interest rates going up or staying higher, and the discount rate that's applied to fair value the investments has gone up, and as a result the value has gone down. But in terms of the rental stream and the cash flow, those are not materially changed. It's just the multiple that's out there at this present compared to previous year.
So is this in relation to any potential sale going through and the discount applying to ACC in terms of their agreement with them? Is that, am I reading that correctly? That
No, it's mainly related to the comparable sales out there. How much are they trading compared to previous year? So for these properties, the price have come down because of the higher interest rates, but this is separate from the ACC contract, which is recorded separately, I think.
So it relates more to the methodology that's been applied to value these properties, and there are two components to that valuation methodology. There's the rental flows, and then there'll be economic assumptions, and in this case it's a change in the economic assumptions that has resulted in that movement rather than the cash flows.
I'm still struggling with that. So it's nothing to do with ACC and potential on-selling to, the remittance back to them from the sale, and it's got to do with the internal valuation by Telfer Young, where because of the higher interest rates, if there were to be a sale, the methodology would lower the value of sale. Is that a way of interpreting that?
Yes, that's correct. That's spot on. So what it is they're valued through a yield or cap rate process, and as that yield or cap rate goes up, the value decreases, and one of the factors that has pushed that yield or cap rate up in the period is movements in interest rates.
Sure, okay. All right, I think I get it, but might need a bit more work. Can I take you to page 8 and just trying to get my head around the table there, the rate revenue, and I've got 2022, 2022 columns. Is that an error there? I couldn't follow that. Is that 2021 or 22 or 23?
Apologies, that's a typo. So the left-hand column should be 2023 and the right-hand column is correctly 2022.
Okay, so it's okay. Look, so that makes sense now. Okay, that's about it from me. Thank you.
Thank you, and welcome, Councillor Hokianga. Nice to see you. Do you have any queries for EY or anything about that our staff could help with?
Not as such, but I did put my hand up while I was online, Madam Chair, and I just think it's probably goes back to some of the line of questioning that Councillor Harding had put on the table, but it's probably more directed to where Susie had answered. So it's just probably one question in particular is probably what determines a high-risk entity. You spoke about a high-risk, those high-risk entities. Do we have a definition of what that might be?
Are you wanting me to answer that now? I can answer that now, absolutely. And we're talking about the commercial applicants. So there is a matrix, a risk matrix that sits behind every application that we assess, and medium to high risk is set at where an applicant is coming through with high future costs. So the fund will release under eligibility. The fund pays for both costs incurred to date already. So an applicant gives us the invoice. They pay for quotes. So if the applicant has got a quote and it's for future work, and the fund also reimburses applicants for in-kind contributions, which is their own time, their own use of their tractors, their own use of machinery at set rates. So a file is deemed, or an application is deemed high risk, where it's a high amount or a high percentage of future costs to be incurred, or where the applicant is applying their own time. So that's quite hard and difficult to verify and validate. So that's what we're deeming high risk, and so they will be audited in due course and have on-site visits and validation of invoices when they spend. Does that answer your question?
Any further?
Thank you, Chair. Just a quick question back on property. So page 7, on the right-hand side, notes that evaluations based on assumptions, including current condition of properties. It's just I wanted, just out of interest, to understand how we actually maintain the condition of our properties, please, our investment properties. A takeaway and follow up. Yeah. Thank you. It's not critical for today.
An aside. All right, thank you.
Hey, thank you.
So if there are no further queries on this report, can I ask that someone moves the recommendation that we are receiving, and you'll move?
Just before we go there, Chair, do we need to, there is a related document to this.
Yes.
Do we need to deal with that as
Do
well?
we need to deal with the pre-concurrence for non-assurance?
Yes, that's the beast.
Do we need to deal with that now in terms of who's agreeing to this? Because it's in the pack.
From our perspective, that would be sensible in terms of happy to either take any questions on that document, or if it's helpful, provide the overarching context.
All right. So perhaps I can just, I had a query with David on this yesterday, and perhaps I can just talk to you all about his response, because I queried what we needed to do about that. So we need they need the council or a representative thereof to confirm that they'd be comfortable from an independence perspective with EY completing the agreed upon procedures and providing remuneration benchmarking data. It doesn't mean that they will complete the work in that space, it just means they will be permitted to do so if council's management team decide to engage them to do so. So I got to say, it didn't make an awful lot of sense to me. And I felt that might be because I'm not close enough to what goes on here day to day. Can you give some more context around it?
EY perform other services for us as well as the annual audit, and there are a number of agreed upon procedures which are sort of a different level of assurance that they provide. The key services they currently provide is agreed upon procedures over the ACC leasehold agreement that we have, just to provide comfort to both parties that we're meeting the requirements of the contract. The other one is on the debenture trust deed reporting that we're required to complete, and there is a possibility that that may assist with some assurance over the Hawke's Bay Disaster Relief Trust processes that were in place during the financial year. So that's currently what is on the table, not to say that there may be other agreed upon procedures that we require assistance with in the future.
Okay.
Yeah, I just might offer the observation, Chair, that I did feel that you could drive a bus through this particular document, and all on request from management is one, so this is a very broad waiver, and it's helpful. Thanks to staff for explaining what they think it means, but I think if the boot was on the other foot, it would be very difficult to get EY to sign a document from us to them, this broad, this non-specific. So I place my confidence in management to control the enthusiasm, the billing enthusiasm of EY, and I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Look, I tend to agree, and without a bit of context around what it is that's being required, and I don't think it's in as an agenda item for us to be deciding right now. And so on that basis, I think we park that, and if you need us to do something, then let's try and deal with that in our next meeting, and we can have further discussions around what the risk committee needs
My
to
question,
be doing.
sorry, am I able to, Stephanie, am I able to ask EY, does this need signing from a councillor and not officer?
Correct, it does. And so if I could take a step back just to maybe explain a little bit more of the context. Really, this is from an independence perspective in terms of the rules that we're required to abide by in terms of the International Code of Ethics for Accountants requires that if we're the auditor of an organisation that's a public interest entity, and the council is a public interest entity, if we're going to provide a service to the council that is not an assurance service, that service needs to be approved by those charged with governance, which is councillors. And there are different ways that we can address this. So the document that's before the committee today, you're right, is a very broad document, and that's the intention. So in a number of instances, what we do is we agree with those charged with governance the broad nature of the services that they'd be comfortable with us providing without impeding our independence, and work on that basis. The other alternative is we could do something that is very specific, so have a document or on a item by item basis, as and when we need to do a piece of work that is not an assurance piece of work, come to council and ask for permission for that particular piece of work. And from our perspective, we're probably indifferent in terms of which of those two pathways we go down. It's more a question around logistics and how we communally as a group want that to operate.
Okay, so perhaps on this, given that it's not it's not come to us under the paper for specific approval on this point, so I don't think we need to go down the rabbit hole any further on it. If it needs to come back to us, let's have full consideration of it with some detail, and then we can understand what it all means. So for now, we will leave that one, and I will liaise with Susie further as to what our next steps need to be, if any. But in terms of the recommendations that are in the paper accompanying the EY report, bear with me as I flip into
Item 8.
where they are. Can anyone tell me the page
Item
number?
8, page 28.
Okay, so we are receiving and noting the EY audit report for the year ending 30 June. So
Happy to still move in this, okay.
Well, you go have a crack.
move, you made it first to the moving. Happy to second. All those in favour?
Can we speak to the motion?
Oh, sorry, yes.
Would you like to speak to the motion?
Anyone want to speak to the
I'd like
motion?
to speak to the motion.
Okay.
And just, look, thank you, Chair, just to thank EY and the staff for a heroic job. This is the first year and a couple that we've gone back to the standard timetable for getting this stuff done. And staff and EY have managed to get us into position to meet deadlines in extraordinary circumstances. So well done to everyone. Thank you.
I agree. There's been some years where the audits have been very late, and this is fantastic in the circumstances. So nice work, everyone. No other comments on the motion? All those in favour?
Aye.
Aye. Fine. Good. Motion carried. Thank you.
Sorry.
All right, so we'll jump back to the confirmation of the minutes from the 10th of May. This is item 3. I ask if anyone has anything to add on those minutes. Councillor Harding? Lee? Nothing to add. Councillor Hokianga, are we happy with them? Online, Councillor Curtin? Nothing to add?
Good.
Okay.
I don't think I
So
can.
can I have someone move that those are accepted as correct?
Move.
Councillor Harding will move that. Second, Councillor Hokianga, would you second that? Do we need to discuss the motion? No. All those in favour?
Aye.
Against? No.
Great.
Carried. Okay. The next item is the risk management policy renewal.
I'll open this, Stephanie, through you, Chair. So the purpose of this paper is to bring to you the risk management policy that's in operation under HBRC. It is part of the audit and risk accountability to ensure that there is an annual review of this policy and to bring that through the Audit and Risk Committee for oversight. It is, if you see that in attachment 1, it is a stock standard policy outlining accountabilities of various parties and the role that this policy will play in the organisation. And this obviously supplements further activities that are undertaken, including such things as this afternoon you will see risk profile, risk management, how we adopt that and implement that at a practical level. I'm going to hand over to Helen, who has put this in place, if there's anything extra from you.
No, probably nothing extra other than to say we did take into account the new methodology that you're going to see later on today. But and I guess there's nothing, it's still aligned to the international standards of 31,000 and all of government recommendations. So just some really minor changes just to take into account the new methodology.
So this is a new policy, or it's an amendments to an existing policy?
It's amendment to an existing policy, yeah. It came through this committee a couple of years ago.
Something on there. It's not jumping out at me. I've made a note and I can't now find it. All right. Does anyone have any queries that they'd like to direct to Helen or Susie on the policy?
Chair, look, my first question, that is to, I guess, Helen or staff. An overall description of the risk management framework. So the policy document specifically notes that it should be read in conjunction with our risk management framework, which we're in the process of embedding a new one. I'm looking for a point in the documentation at which that is clearly and succinctly articulated so people can understand it. And in everything, and I had to go back to the workshop that we had back in July to find that. So at the moment, it seems to me that that's a gap in the way that we are communicating what we do. But I might be missing something.
In the you're saying in the policy we don't clearly articulate how the policy, where it sits in relation to the overall framework?
Yeah, nowhere do we have a succinct communication around what our overall risk management framework is now that I can find.
So you're wanting a succinct, so in one document, which makes sense to be the risk management policy document, one thing that you look at and go, this is the risk management framework.
So if we go, and I'll just give you an example, if we go back to David's, lovely to have you in the room, David. If you go back to the documents that we went through in the workshop, there was a really clear articulation about, amongst other things, about how, balancing risk and so that there were concepts and the bedrock of the way that we're looking at managing risk, which we simply don't see in this document now. So that overall philosophy has been lost until we get back into that framework, and that's one example why it's so important that we can articulate that framework.
Very cool. I think today what we've provided you is with a policy document and potentially should have provided the framework, the policy, the strategy, all in one, so that you can actually see that in a big flow. So noted.
Yep. Okay, thank you. Can I just take the opportunity just to ask governance? And Leanne, this is a question for you. It's extraordinarily hard using the equipment that we have on Stella to track back and find documents that have been presented in different forums. Would it simply be possible under our store of documents for risk and audit to actually have all the workshop material brought into that so that we have a single point where we could find all the relevant documents? Can we do that, please?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I might make a note of that to have a further discussion around how Stella could perhaps be enhanced somewhat, more friendly. But in terms of the policy itself, nothing further from your perspective you're wanting to query?
Sorry, but yes. Just a couple of things. If we go to page 3 of the policy itself, which is page 7 of Stella, talks about risk management roles and responsibilities, and the first role of council is to set the organisation's risk appetite. I want to understand what that looks like, please, because I haven't seen an articulation of that anywhere, and it might be just on the job to-do list. And we are not, this committee is not council, but we will be recommending to council what that looks like, and so it's a job to do.
Yeah.
Please.
So I can answer that. So there previously was a risk appetite that was in draft that had gone through the various committees. With David's new framework, we are slicing and dicing that a different way. So that comes through as that methodology happens, that appetite becomes clearer through that new methodology. So, yeah, I don't know if you want to add anything to that, David.
Let me pick it up and say.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I think I'm just conscious of the time as well, and we've got an hour set aside to go through the whole piece of the framework. So I'm just wondering, matters that relate to the how of how this is going to fit into that framework, perhaps we can make a note of them to cover off later in the agenda. And we'll focus on providing the feedback on some of the aspects of the policy where there are gaps, because I agree that's certainly something that we need to look into further around how it's going to work in practice, but I think that feeds in more to what we're going to cover with David later.
Okay, that's fine. Can I just table one other question, which probably will go in the same bucket, but it rises on the same page, in my mind anyway. So this risk system, is all about managing the risks before they crystallise. What I want to understand is the role of this committee in risks that have crystallised. So what our role, if any, is in disaster recovery incidents, critical incident management. And I just wonder, it's just the natural flow on of understanding what our role is in that. And it may be an oversight role during the event, after the event, it might be no role at all, but it would be nice to nail that down as we're evolving this thing. Thank you.
Yeah, in a disaster, a whole lot of operational decisions get taken, some of which council has control of and some of which council doesn't. But I think it's critically important that in those situations there's an ongoing conversation between the chief executive and councillors around risk, and if at any point we need to call an extraordinary meeting of audit and risk, we should do so. So I know that's not a perfect answer, but it's probably a judgment at the time that we need to take. It's very much one of ongoing dialogue. If we look at the kind of risk framework we've got, I think those ongoing discussions around uncertainty, what we have control of and what we don't, are going to be critical in those sort of situations. So, I think it's a case of dialogue more than anything. Bringing the committee back together when we need to.
Yeah, and I think to your point on picking up the risks that have arisen so that we know that somebody is looking at that from a risk lens, I think my view and our role to play there is once there is some real detail around the factors that have contributed to risk so that these various reports are finalised, they then come through this committee for us to compare the problems that have been identified with our risk framework and see where the gaps are and ask for some accountability that way. From what my understanding is, nothing is quite at that point yet in terms of some of the issues that have been.
So where risks are crystallised, i.e. there's an issue or there's an event or there's an incident, what you've seen today is we're now producing reporting in here that will articulate what some of those instances and how many, whether material or medium or high risk incidents, they will come here for discussion and recommendation, etc., whatever that might be. I think where things start to get tricky for us is where Nick has just articulated, is where you've got a national emergency, and what's the role of this committee versus what's the role of council and through discussions. So, and also, what is the role of this committee in relation to those regional-wide reviews that are happening and national reviews, and how do they come through this committee? So that is currently an ongoing discussion with Nick as to how they will come back in here and any risks/issues off the back of those reviews, how they integrate back into this forum. There is an intention to bring them back into this forum, so please don't think when we're trying to avoid this forum. We want to channel as much as we can through here. So definitely from an operational point of view, incidents, risks, etc. But for those broader emergency cyclone related, we're still trying to work through how we integrate between the council and this committee and what should go where and how will that land. But definitely thematics out of those reviews will definitely come in here and any recommendations, yeah.
Yeah, if I can just respond to that, that's, from my point of view, that's a really helpful discussion.
Yeah.
But I just wanted to, in response to Nick's quarter, which was focused mostly on the disaster side of things, which has its own structure through civil defence. If I give the example of a critical reputational incident or a critical IT incident, so those are ones, you know, we're on the scale that there's an immediacy and a level of risk, and that's a question of just where that, from a governance point of view, where that sits in the organisation. It'll be just good to work through the thinking around that.
Yeah, so this obviously meets quarterly. The intention will always be to bring those here. They are operational risk incidents, what you've just articulated. In the event that, and the earliest meeting is not this one and it's a council meeting, it will go to council just to get that escalated, is my view on how that would work, but in conjunction, obviously, on timing.
Or potentially extraordinary meetings.
Yeah, potentially. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and I think we have some scope under the terms of reference as well to meet more frequently. We debated having meetings every 2 months, and whether that was something that was appropriate on an ongoing basis, perhaps not. Maybe in the short term, it is something that we should be looking at, not necessarily extraordinary meetings, but just giving us some scope within that that drafting of the terms of reference to have some more frequency. And that's something that I'm open to, depending on what the workload's going to be.
I think through you, Chair, I'm really conscious that where risk is managed, is identified and adequately managed as part of day-to-day business, that's the job that council essentially gives me ultimately to do. And the things that I bring to this table need to be those that are really material to council, but also looking at under that policy, kind of hit those issues in 7.1 around council's role as governors. So I think in all of these things there's a little bit of figuring out exactly where those boundaries lie, and that's something that we'll probably test with each other as we head through the news and risk framework. So welcome the ongoing conversation.
Okay. Nothing from you on the policy?
You got a question?
Neil, question you had?
Yes, thank you. I just want to go to, I think it's page 1, policy detail, policy goal and objectives. I've sort of drawn a conclusion from what we've described there in 1.1. There's very much, if you like, an administrative tick box exercise, and we sort of park the document, sign off the document, park it, and that's the end of that. Whereas I wonder whether, in fact, we ought to be framing this in terms of the goal, and I've written a few notes myself here, if you like, to protect the lives and livelihoods of all in the region. Some other aspirational goal as opposed to administrative one, so that the entire organisation has an upward and outward looking focus as opposed to an internal looking one. We've got the current examples in front of us around the cyclone, but there are others as well. Havelock North Water's another, where we've had major events of which we are a party to, one way or another, and potentially could have encouraged a greater vigilance on behalf of the organisation to, if you like, identify and manage the risk better. So my question is really around, should we have a much broader, bigger, more ambitious goal for risk management, and, if you like, bring to the party a whole new lens of looking at it, so that just for example, in forestry, we touch forestry in some way, either regulation or running our own forests. Is identifying forestry slash, for example, by our staff in the field, something we can, if you like, alert, bring to attention to the organisation. Climate change is another. It's there. What are we doing about it in terms of risk management? So my broader question is around: are we sufficiently raising our sights with the policy?
Thank you, Neil, for those comments. I tend to agree, and I think I have a slightly different way of looking at it, though. To me, the thing that is missing in this policy is the culture, and I think Neil has articulated why, because it's very much focused on risk and what you need to do to manage risk, tick, 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 rather than looking outwards and saying, what is the effect of managing risk? And it's the points that Neil's raising. So I wonder if there could be some additional element in terms of that policy goal. The reason that you have a risk management policy is to keep people safe and to keep assets safe and to manage the organisation appropriately. So I just wonder if it's missing that cultural lens, if that would address the kind of concern that Councillor Curtin's raised.
Through you, Chair, I think we've just, the risk policy, absolutely about keeping the organisation, people safe. I think if we develop a policy that talks about keeping all the people in the region safe, we get into some really challenging places, because actually we don't have control of a lot of that. I think risk management in its broadest sense around hazards, floods, tsunamis, etc., is a job that the council's involved in, but I'm not sure it would be easy to write a risk management policy that deals with that. So my advice to council would be this is about managing the risks inside the organisation. If we tried to construct a policy that did that for everyone in the region, we would be in a challenging place.
I don't think we're talking about doing it for everyone in the region. Noted, I agree that would be difficult to achieve, but I think it's just getting the cultural overlay piece right, because there's no point having a risk management policy if risk is not a healthy culture in the organisation. And I think that a way of addressing that could be to have something in here that is broader and more aspirational along the lines of what Councillor Curtin has raised. It doesn't need to be puppy dogs and rainbows everywhere, but something that's sufficiently targeted that reflects what it is that you're actually trying to achieve by doing this. Yes.
Chair, to me, actually, a lot of what you're articulating is covered in the first bullet point under 1.1. I think if you have a circumstance where all staff are aware of their obligations, then you could put that in a way that references culture and that sort of thing, but pragmatically, that's a very big statement. If people in the organisation are aware of what they need to do risk management-wise, actually that's a big tick, because I don't believe that exists in most entities at the moment.
Something to add, Councillor Harding?
Thank you, Chair. Just a couple of observations. One is, that might help. One is that we're embedding risk management culture across the organisation that needs to trickle down into every staff member's job description, KPIs, those kind of things. So that's quite a change. So, or to the extent that it's not in there at the moment, and even if it's not in there, then the suggestion is, also even if it is in there, that may be a matter of emphasis, to borrow an EY phrase, that it might need to be elevated, it might need to be measured, because I'm very conscious that when faced with 100 responsibilities in a job description, only 5 of them ever make it into the KPIs in any given year. So just needs some thought, and that we need to, in developing this new system, we need to embed it in the staff through their contracts. So that was one thing. The other thing I just wanted to observe is that, and to Councillor Curtin's point, all this policy is doing is helping to give effect to our overall corporate goals, essentially, which is to look after the environment and keep our people as safe as we possibly can. And so I tend to see the way I look at it is that needs to be, those goals need to be clearly articulated, and this needs to relate to this in the same way that our civil defence emergency management governance needs to relate to that. So it needs to be in there. I'm not so convinced it needs to be so articulated in so much detail in this particular document, but we mustn't lose it. We mustn't lose sight of what we're here for. So thank you, Councillor Curtin, for bringing that up in the first place.
I wonder if, Madam Chair, through you, it could help. I wonder if a link to our community outcomes, which are ultimately what the organisation is trying to deliver, might be added, and if the committee was minded to give us that as an action to add those community outcomes into the policy, that might help.
Yes, I was just arriving at that point myself. So perhaps we could put that into the purpose, that this policy enhances council's commitment to those community outcomes and link it there.
Yep.
Councillor Curtin, would you be comfortable with that? Does that go some way to address your concerns?
Sure. I totally get the situation where, and in response to the Chief Executive, that we're not in a position to save the world. We won't be going into Gaza anytime soon to sort that out. But what we can do is have much greater vigilance. And I'll give you the example of Havelock North Water, where in the bowels of the ship in the Regional Council, essentially a war was going on between two sets of staff, both here in Hastings, around the consenting process for the water supply in Hastings, and yet that never saw the light of day. My view is that if staff are fully conscious of the need to escalate and elevate these sorts of risks, in other words, they recognise the risks to life and limb by allowing a situation to remain within the deep depths of the organisation, then we ought to be trying to foster that environment. And our more recent event, in terms of, say, the telemetry, if there'd been an appreciation that we didn't have line of sight on our telemetry relay stations, etc., then someone may have brought that forward more diligently. So what I'm saying is a more aspirational goal and environment for staff to operate in adds urgency to their work and what they see out there. So the whole organisation, going back to what you've said, Chair, around culture, if the culture is very focused on, is this a risk to life and limb, and we are a party to it as an organisation, let's see it, let's have line of sight on it. That's the sort of thing that I think has been missing in my experience over a long period, and I just don't want to see, I would like to see a shift, if you like, in the way we approach it.
Okay, so look, I think we can cover off some of those points as well in our later discussion. They're worthwhile points to consider further. In terms of what we're being asked to do here now, and Councillor Hook-Young, I'm conscious that you haven't had an opportunity to query or comment. No? Okay. Looking at the policy, we've suggested some changes in terms of picking up those community outcomes, either in the purpose or in the policy goal or objective. Subject to those suggested changes, then are we happy to look at receiving and considering the report? Is someone happy to move that we?
Chair, could I suggest that we simply receive and note the report? I think that it would be problematical to accept the policy based on the provision of for revising it. I think it'd be better if it came back. There's no
come back.
urgency, so.
Okay, well, that ties into our subsequent conversation as well. So we receive it and we'll review it again in the next meeting.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, so I would be happy to just simply move a recommendation that we receive and note the risk management policy renewal staff report and thank staff for that report.
Second. Mr. Hokianga. Does anyone want to discuss the motion further? No, all those in favour?
Aye.
Aye. Any against? No, motion carried. Break. We should have a break for 15, 10 or 15 minutes?
Yeah.
Are we going 10 minutes perhaps?
Yeah.
All right, so we'll meet back at 10:18. compliance report, which I'm looking at on page 11. And we have Jess Bennett and Susie to talk about that.
Thank you. Would you like me to just rip into this? So this is our normal Treasury compliance report that you've seen before. The purpose obviously is this, in our long-term plan, in our financing policies, we do have a Treasury policy which sets out compliance limits, in particular around liquidity, borrowing, funding, deposits, and just some of those movements in our managed funds. So we engage PricewaterhouseCoopers to do this on our behalf each month, each quarter, although we have access to a monthly dashboard, and what you're seeing here is an outcome of the last reporting period. Two things I want to highlight to you is paragraph 10, 11 and 12. We have had some exceptions to our policy over the reporting period to June. What we do have as part of our Treasury policy is counterparty limits. Now, counterparty limits admittedly limit you from how much you can deposit or borrow / etc. through various counterparties. As you will appreciate, during the cyclone, we received unexpected, although we lobbied for it, unexpected enormous amounts of money from the government for our debris funding and or regional recovery agency. We put those on short-term deposit at the time, or not short-term deposit, but at rates that would give us some interest rates, and placed those with generally Jarden, who put them with BNZ. That triggered our counterparty limit threshold at the time. Now, as you all know, we have subsequently spent that money, and it was only a short period of time. However, what we did do was breach some of those limits at the time that we were under. The second piece I want to highlight to you is paragraph 19. We have debt. We're taking on short-term debt. We're also carrying debt that we reprice and reprofile when that rolls over if it's not repaid. Our compliance strategy or policy states that we must have certain amounts of debt in certain buckets, 1 to 3, 3 to 7 and 7 to 15 years. Because we have taken short-term borrowing to pay for the cyclone, we are starting to get at the upper limit of that 0 to 3 years. Now, we haven't breached it yet, but I'm just forewarning you that those limits are close. The third thing, sorry, and I said I only had two, but I actually have three. The third thing is what you are seeing here in relation to the managed funds and some of the risks and the shortfalls. You will all be aware that we've had Scott Hamilton looking at our investment strategy and what we're doing around our investments to get better returns. Can I just say that that whole piece of work was actually triggered a year ago off the back of this compliance report, where this committee saw returns that weren't adequate, that weren't aligned, and so that ongoing piece of work will affect and impact some of these triggers and what we're seeing in the managed funds reporting going forward when that gets approved. So just for your understanding, there's a paper going to Council next week in relation to that investment strategy by Scott Hamilton again. So those are just three things I wanted to highlight just around this Treasury compliance at the moment of interest.
Okay. Anything further from you, Jess?
No.
All right. Just picking up on the counterparty risk issue, who does that get escalated to at the time, and in what kind of time frame? Is that escalated into the council at the time to be aware of that issue, or?
Not for those ones, because we've just rectified it, essentially.
Yeah.
Okay. That crops up.
And is there anything in the policy that contemplates exceptions needing to happen on an emergency kind of basis?
No. No, there's not. I think some of these limits, though, Jess was talking to me this morning about this, is some of these limits were set in the last LTP or set possibly even prior to that, using values at that time which represented our total cost and our deposits, etc. So actually holding 15 million or 20 million is quite low. It's quite low when you're dealing in some of the numbers that we're dealing in now, especially as we look at the next LTP around some of our long-term debt and increasing that. So this will be looked at as part of, as I said, the investment outcome in our long-term plan, where we may end up having to increase those thresholds.
You say that you talk about the funding and the liquidity ratios. This is in your paper. Talking about that currently the current liquidity ratio meets the policy. Is that current as at October?
That's in June. That was June, yeah.
That was June, so you don't know what it is right
It's
now.
about 24%, I think, as at end of September.
Okay. Right. Any forecasting that's going to remain constant going forward, or it's going to change in terms of the liquidity ratios? Is that going to be, that's going to
We're
continue
building
to be
that
a
into
problem?
the LTP based on the updated debt forecasts. Yes.
All right. So let's go around the table and see who else has got some questions. Should we start at this end, this time with Councillor Hokianga?
No questions for me.
Okay.
Chair, I just want to note that I'm eagerly awaiting the investment strategy recommendations. I think that has the potential to be an absolute game changer for us, especially in the longer term.
Yeah. Noted.
Kia ora, Chair. Look, my first question really follows on from your own question around the triggering of exceptions reporting. And so what I want to understand is, for all of these limits, whether the process of exceptions is just driven on a quarterly basis, or whether there is an ongoing oversight of those. And so simply my question.
So we have as I said, PricewaterhouseCoopers, we have a agreement with them to provide us this information monthly, and we have a monthly catch-up with PricewaterhouseCoopers. They provide us recommendations both on interest rate risk hedging strategies, and provide us recommendations that are tracked internally in our internal dashboards, albeit that level of recommendation doesn't make its way through to this compliance reporting, but it's how operationally we are managing that risk behind the scenes in conjunction with them. So it is managed monthly. I think at the time, Zan, how did we not realise we were going to breach the counterparty, for example? Why did we not know that when we executed that transaction in the first place? That's a really good point. And we...
Yeah, I can speak to that. That's around the lumpiness of the cash flows that we need to hold for the various different large payment runs that are going out at times, especially over these last few months as the Silk Task Force has been operating a lot. So we try to transfer the money in anticipation of that, but we don't always get it 100%, and I feel like the particular exceptions where they've been over have been quite low risk. And if we look at how the policy was set originally, it was based on our total revenue amounts, and that's how they worked out the 15 and $20 million limits. And if we look at the total revenue and the level of volume that's been coming through, it's well in excess of that. So that would, in theory,
increase those policy limits if we applied the same rationale. So it's just putting a lot of day-to-day pressure with those current policy limits. Just in
So,
that management.
The answer is monthly, Zan. We will know monthly, and we will rectify that either because we've triggered something, or PricewaterhouseCoopers are eluding us to say, hey, this is repricing, you might need to look at swaps. That we will literally do that on a monthly basis with Pricewaterhouse.
Yep. So, Susie, coming from a similar background, you will appreciate that for some risks and these kind of risks in some organisations, it would be reported, monitored daily with escalation procedures through management. That may be overkill for this organisation, but I think from what I've taken this morning, we will be reviewing some of those limits through the LTP process. I'd suggest that would be a good opportunity for us to look as a risk and audit at the system. And if I could ask, or if the chair would be able to ask for a paper that looked at our system in totality as we look to set those limits, then we could have a robust think about them and also understand where our own internal reporting and accounting capacity is taking us in terms of our ability to look at this in more real time.
So that is a part of the Treasury policy already. It's a day-to-day management through to the CFO of any exceptions, along with weekly cash flow reporting. So that is managed, we are managing that like that, but in terms of the exceptions, they don't really go further. We rectify them and then they come into this compliance reporting.
Okay, but you are aware of them on a daily basis?
Yes, yeah.
Marvellous.
Yeah.
Right. No, maybe not?
The team
We
is
are,
the CFO, the team are managing
Okay,
them.
so at some point, as we go to change, resetting limits, maybe we could just have an overview of how the system operates.
Okay. When is that policy next up for a review then? Is it the policy or is it the
Starting
LTP?
now, no, so the LTP is underway, the investment strategy, the financing strategy, the Treasury policy, it's all up for review, which will be coming back through Council in February, around about.
Okay. Is there an appetite for the committee to look at that beforehand, looking around the table?
Sure.
Yes?
Work it into the program, but at the very latest, as we change the limits.
Yeah, good.
Can we do that? Thank you. Yes.
Right, so we'll get into the meat of the questions now. Look, 18, para 18 and the table, I couldn't reconcile the total debt of $89 million in 19 against any of the numbers in the table in 18. So could somebody help me with that, please?
Is this in the
paper?
management paper?
Yep. So in 19, it talks about a total debt of 89 million. In the table, it talks about 84 or 100, depending on whether we include HBRIC internal loan or not.
I think that might just be a timing with PwC's repayments, the loan repayments in line. They're about 6 million. Their reporting is a couple of weeks out just of the principal repayments that come through on their system. I think that's why that's sitting at 89. So their reporting doesn't include the 16 million HBRIC loan either.
We'll have to come back to you, Zan, just
But
to
we can confirm
for sure on that one.
Okay, and related to that, 20 notes that we borrowed a further 15 million in the quarter to 30 September. So if I add that number into the short-term funding bucket, then that would be triggering an exception.
That is correct.
Yep, so that's probably the space we're in at the moment. So and I might have missed part of a conversation, which was a question about where it is, and are we getting to a point where we're doing our planning and actually doing our interest rate risk management?
Yes.
When and what does that look like, please?
So just on that particular one, so we normally consult with PwC Treasury Advisors before we borrow, just to get there where we should place the tenor of the the debt and what the interest rate strategy is on that new debt. So that 15 million drawdown was actually split into 10 and 5, and we placed some of it on long term so we didn't breach those buckets.
Right, okay, that makes a lot of sense, because I've been looking at our debt going up and going, it looks like there's some management going on anyway,
Yes,
which is great.
Correct, yeah.
So, well done.
We do leverage, we leverage Pricewaterhouse more than you think, just in terms of their modelling and their strategy, and they do help us with our debt strategy, etc. So we do use them more than you think.
Right, and I'll try and make this my last question. If we go to 26, and it's simply the capital, the indexation or the capital protected amount. I simply couldn't get 2% compounding to work. If you go from 30 June, if you take, say, the third line of that table, or the second line below the headings, at 30 June, but the 6 months to December 22, the capital protected amount, which is simply a 2% indexation, goes up by $1.1 million. And then in the next 6 months, it only goes up by 500,000.
I think we've taken the annual amount there, but I'll have to double check that, Zan. So I think the December, it's not apportioned on a 6 monthly basis potentially, but I'll need to check it.
Yeah, okay, I don't, yeah, I'm not expecting an underlying problem, hopefully just a reporting system problem, and we all know that 2% is a not really a relevant measure these days, but we'll sort that out at some point. Thank you.
Thanks.
Councillor Curtin, do you have any queries that need explanation?
Yes, if I could just go to, essentially might be best to start at paragraph 21. I just wanted to get a picture of the short-term debt liquidity and with the purpose, if you like. I'm assuming that the insurance payment, the 30 million, is to reimburse the sedum costs, and I'm assuming to stand up PP&E and infrastructure. Can I just get a sense for that, possibly in relation to paragraph 17, where we've got 25 million drawn down for assist with Cyclone Gabriel costs, 15 million was short term, remaining 10 million is medium term. So I'm just trying to understand when that insurance money comes back into play, and when would be interesting as well, and it's going to be dropped into and to repay the short-term debt. Is there a notion that the insurance money is used to stand up the PP&E and infrastructure?
So it will, I think this is really just managing the flow of the funds. But so at the moment we have 30 million of short-term borrowings. So if we're wanting to repay down any debt, so we're just not taking out too much in the meantime. That's what we would use to repay down first before redrawing for any further capital or repair spends as cash flow sort of needs require it. So it's just managing the timing of that so we can ensure that we keep the costs down in terms of the borrowing costs.
Is that your question?
Yeah. Well, I appreciate. Yeah, that's the reality of it. But we get 30 million in the door for insurance, and plus NEMA proceeds.
No, we're expecting more than that. The 30 million is the amount of our short-term borrowings that we currently have.
Just to repay
We're
the short-term debt, which is currently 30 million.
We're hoping to get a hell of a lot more than that. Oh, sorry, shouldn't.
Sure. Okay, all right. I'll contemplate that some more. I was just trying to get my head around whether we were funding short-term liquidity, or does it fall into those the debt profile 0 to 3 years, the 49 or the 50 million that's sitting in that short term, the 0 to 3 year category, does the money go back, the insurance money and NEMA money go back into that pot?
Essentially, yes. Yep, just if timing dependent of what we require for cash flows at the time.
But if we're getting money from NEMA and insurance money, would we dump some of that and do we replenish CEDM reserves?
No, that's a different methodology in terms of the accounting treatment for replenishing the reserves. This is purely just the Treasury management of our cash funds and debt that we hold.
Can you see the point I'm getting at, though, is we've got insurance money, which I'm assuming is for covering PP&E. We've stood PP&E up. Does it go to replenish that? Does it go to those particular line items? And that we may have funded that through borrowing, and thus, so it's a bit of a complicated matrix of, if you like, returning back to status quo. And I'm just wondering, is that the intention here?
Yeah, so Neil, the NEMA reimbursement and the insurance reimbursement are purely to cover costs for the cyclone. The fact that the CEDM reserve is in deficit is an accumulation over time which started in COVID times. So insurance and NEMA will not be used to reimburse and top back up reserves. It's purely to cover costs incurred, actual costs incurred on the cyclone.
Thank you very much.
Anything further? Neil? No? Okay. So we're being asked to receive and consider the Treasury Compliance Report. Can I ask someone moves that recommendation? Councillor McIntosh, Councillor Harding seconds. Anyone want to discuss the motion?
Yeah,
Yes.
I would just like to make an observation, Chair. We haven't gone through the actually quarterly Treasury Management Report, but there's good alignment between the paper we've had and that report. There's one area that we haven't covered, and it's the investment returns. And I just thought it was worthwhile pointing out that there was a significant underperformance for both Mercer and Jardine during the period, and by quite an amount. But I think we just need to see that, and so it's worth pointing out, but we need to see that in the context of volatility of markets and the fact that we've recently done a review of the performance of both of those funds, and there were no overall issues with that. So I just see that as volatility as one point. And the other point is that we have a plan around funds management, which involves HBRIC, and so all this area will be looked at again soon. Thank you.
Yeah. My understanding was that we were picking up the Treasury report as a whole, which was being summarised in the paper. But note the comments, and I think it ties into the review being done more broadly on the investment piece, which will of course pick up those discrepancies in the returns. All right, so there being no further comments on the motion, those in favour?
Aye.
Aye.
Any against? No, motion carried. All right, insurance annual review and update is item 6. Again with Susie and Jess.
Right, I will introduce this paper through you, Chair. The purpose of this is to put to this committee the current status of our insurance cover. It's part of the terms of reference for this committee that there is oversight on insurance policies such that, and I don't have the specific terms, but it is part of your mandate to ensure that there is insurance cover and have oversight of various policies. The reason why we're bringing this to you is our policies are due for renewal on the 1st of November. So a large number of them will be rolling over. As you can appreciate, in the current market, there are challenges with getting insurance, including the cost of premiums escalating. I guess the purposes today is to just outline to you currently the insurance cover that we have. We are still waiting on our brokers to come to us with the new proposed, what insurance is available, what can they get, where are they going to get that from. But I guess today is just outlining to you what we currently have. The second piece of this paper is to seek your endorsement for us to proceed into a proposal with MWLAS. MWLAS, we have a group policy with them and other local councils in the North Island. They have recently done an exercise, scenario modelling, what would happen if there was a major earthquake or further scenario that could impact the central North Island where all those councils are sitting, and their advice is the current cover in there is probably not adequate to cover us should an event happen across all the councils. So it's a bit chicken and egg what we're asking you here, because in order to participate in getting the extra 200 million, we need to say that we want to participate so that they can go and price that. And so we don't actually know yet how much that will cost. But until we say we want to participate, we can't be part of that transaction. So slight chicken and egg. So there's two things happening here. One, oversight of the policies that we have in place and open for discussion around that. That was an attachment. And two, consideration for entering into a further 200 million capacity on our infrastructure policy. I will open that to questions. I'll take the paper as read, but open up for questions. I think it's probably easier.
So on that first point, can I just clarify my understanding what you said, that the policies are due for renewal on the 1st of November, but you're still waiting on the broker to come back, which doesn't leave an awful lot of time, does it?
That is correct. So what will normally happen in the normal course of business is that these insurance policies that we have in place continue through until such a time as the new policy has been given to us, and we accept that.
Yeah.
We recently saw that for our contract works insurance cover. It's not all of these policies that are renewing, but the material ones will be. But they will just continue through until such a time. Well, there will be an end date, obviously, but they will continue to cover us.
So if you haven't made that decision by 1 November, the coverage will still be ongoing, pending?
Temporarily extend it, yeah.
Yes. Okay. All right. And my second question is on the pooling arrangement. Is there still the ability to withdraw?
Yes.
Even though you say you're going to participate?
I think price dependent on that one, where they can get it and if they can get it in the market.
All right, we'll go around the table. Councillor McIntosh, do you have any?
I think, just to clarify that, I think you asked the same question as I was thinking, but just to be clear, so yeah, the additional 200 million, we're just saying yes in principle and subject to how many partake and therefore what the premium is.
Yes.
Can you explain to me what harbour master liability is?
Yes, Katrina is in the room and I'm going to open that up to Katrina. Do you want to explain what harbour master insurance covers?
Through you, Chair, our harbour master is responsible should anything happen in our navigable waters within 12 nautical miles. So you might remember some years ago, Rena, if, for example, the harbour master was to take action to order a ship in or out, which he can do, and that results in an incident, then our insurance covers us for such an event. Does that make sense? So it's basically to cover the harbour master for actions that he may take in relation to navigation and safety within 12 nautical miles.
So is it more broadly, if the harbour master issues an instruction
A direction, yeah.
or which results in an incident through which people can have a crack at us over,
Correct.
it's covering us for that.
Correct. And of course, we can never get enough insurance to cover the total cost.
No.
Because when those incidents happen, they are big.
Yeah, so that's, just getting back to the number on that, so excess layer, which is, HBRC has an excess layer which is 75 million over the 25 million on Harbour Master's liability. So does that mean we've covered up to the 25?
We were covered up to 100, so it was the 25 plus the 75, but we've only, that excess layer of 75, we've only been able to actually get access to 50 million cover, so we're covered for 75 million for the Harbour Master.
Okay.
So that's a change, that's a material change from prior year policies to this current one.
But obviously we have significant risk matrices and processes and audit processes that cover the Harbour Master's functions.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
And where does the port sit in all of that? Are there separate insurances that
The port has their own insurances. But the legislation for the Harbour Master is quite broad, so he can take over the entire operations of the port if he so needed to.
Any further queries from around the table?
Thank you, Chair. Could staff please explain the layers, the insurance layering? So I'm looking at, what page are we, 18, and it's under additional MW less above ground cover, the first and second paras. I don't understand layers.
Oh, sorry.
I'm sorry. So how does that work in practice? Primary
Yeah.
layer, 125, secondary, 175?
Yeah, so the MWLS, sorry, apologies, that's actually below ground cover. So that's our infrastructure assets that we have a group policy with MWLS. So ensuring our infrastructure, we take out an initial layer. I believe the first one for MWLS is 300. I've got that right. No, 125 is the primary layer. So essentially they do that because that's the first cab off the rank for any claims. So they don't maximise that first, like the question was asked, why wouldn't we just increase that primary layer? Well, essentially that primary layer holds slightly more risk than others for smaller claims coming up because they will be the first layer that is claimed against. So the second layer of, was that 175 million, would then take us up to the 300 million. So that second layer has slightly less risk than the third, and then the third layer again, even because it's only in the event of something really large happening. So it's the first layer, the 125, could be claimed on every year by a council, let's say, whereas the third layer wouldn't get touched in those smaller claims.
So I'm not there yet.
Yeah.
Is it because there are different assets within the different layers, or what? I don't understand the differentiation between the layers. I'm sorry.
All assets are covered across all layers, but it's really about where they place that insurance with the insurers that take that. So that first primary layer have said, yeah, I'm okay for 125 million in the event of a loss. We can see that your claims are X, Y, and Z over the last 10 years. They kind of know where that sits and what their risk is for 125 million. So it's different, well, it's usually different insurers for the different layers, but some of them could be spread across all of them because they're happy to take bites of that risk in each layer.
So they're the same assets, but different terms and conditions and exclusions and rats and mice, whatever.
Well, it's more about in the event of a $125 million loss, that first layer of insurers are the ones that have to pay up first. So it's that second layer If we were to claim 250 million of insurance, there's a loss of that level is when they actually come in. So that's less likely to happen.
That makes sense. Thank you. I understand now.
Could be different terms though, if it's a different insurer, they may not cover everything that was in the first one, so it might be priced slightly differently, or will be priced differently because it's secondary. So honestly, these layers have slightly different, but the underlying assets are the same.
It's important to note as well that we have a sublimit under all of those layers, so we're not actually covered for 500 million or 300 million currently is the case. We're only insured up to our sublimit level, so yeah. But you get the benefits of the group because...
I've learnt a lot just now. Look, my next question, hopefully the last on this, but it is around the implications, the financial implications of increasing our insurance, and it seems to be driven mostly around that earthquake risk. But we know we've got indications already that our current spend of 1.1 million is likely to go up by 20%, so 250K. And then on top of that, we're looking at another $800,000 to $900,000.
That's the total cost for the excess layer. So depending on if all 9 councils opt in, then it would be split across the 9 councils, but we don't know the number of councils that are opting in yet.
Okay, slightly less scary. Yeah. So the question was going to be how, given the competing priorities in our LTP that we're all painfully aware of, what is the best process for managing that? And it does appear that, as you've explained, in this chicken and egg situation, that we have to express interest and then we have an opportunity to agree or not agree. Can I just get clarity around what the drop dead date is for that, the final date that we get to choose that, and how that might align to our LTP, please?
They are tracking very closely together. Decisions or anticipated things needed for the LTP and the dropping of this. We are required, if we want to participate, to let MWLAS know by the end of this month so that they can price that. So we will know mid-November, end of November, potentially what that will look like, if not quite quickly by that. Just in terms of the overall cost, we obviously have and have a number in our forecasted LTP around this. There is ability to consume some of this in that number at the moment. So I have double checked obviously with our CFO on this and it's not outside of the realms of where the LTP is heading.
Thank you.
It's quite difficult for us to know the extent to which the bases are covered or not with what we've got here, and I'm wondering, is there in determining A, what is covered, and B, the extent of the cover, is there some sort of template you work off? I don't know, LGNZ, if they have anything to answer that. I'm thinking, if a lot of people have said to me after the flood, it's really good that Hastings had bridges covered, because a lot of councils don't do that. So I don't know what our bridge equivalent is. In other words, how do we have comfort that everything that should be covered is covered?
We're working through that and we're proposing some more robust reviews over those areas of the business or the assets that we need to ensure we cover, and actually looking at the values of the rebuild of those assets. We've been working closely with the assets team around the rebuild costs, and we're getting really good data obviously because we're rebuilding lots of stop banks and pump stations and that sort of thing. So we'll have some actual numbers to use for what value we should be insuring those assets for. Whereas,
if you haven't said that, maybe the insurers should have a good idea on this, shouldn't they? So they should be able to say, look, here are the
exclusions.
Yeah, here are the 10 correct. Key things you must cover, and here are some discretionary ones. And
yes,
But as things stand at the moment, we could have missed out. Don't take this the wrong way, but we could have missed out a big material item, and I don't know about that. But
correct.
Relying on you guys to have sufficient intel to know to say what you should cover and how much it should be covered for.
I agree with that. One of the things Jess and I would like to do is put our broker with the councillors, such that whether it's a workshop, it will be a workshop, and use an hour of that to articulate what do these policies mean, what is not included, and just how we've concluded before we sign up onto those renewals.
Actually, I would really appreciate that.
And I
Chair.
think a lot of staff would appreciate that as well, Jock, if I'm honest. This is the first time, and I get that it is quite hard to know what's in and what's out, because this hasn't been into council like this, into this committee for that discussion.
So when could that discussion take place? That would be within the next couple of weeks, month?
They're happy to come at any time, so it's really about which areas you'd like to talk about, because they have specific specialists for the different types of policies and assets here, so I just need to get a direction from you.
For me, I would like the broker to be able to give us comfort that we were adequately covered. It's a very broad statement, I know, but adequate coverage means we know what we've got covered, we know what we haven't got covered, and what we've got partially covered. And so we're making, on those latter two, we're making commercial calls on that, which is to say the risk of that is extraordinarily remote and it's very expensive to insure it, so we're only going to go, I don't know, half cover or something, I'm not sure, but I'd just like comfort from someone who does this stuff all the time to know that we're in good shape.
So if that could be scheduled as a workshop in the coming weeks,
My preference is we just wait for these guys to get a price, because I think it's going to be really helpful is what we're not going to get. Yes. So we are expecting them to say, we're not going to cover you anymore for bleh, bleh, and it would be helpful to present that at the same time for that discussion. Okay. We can take that action, that's good.
Right, so in terms of questions around the table on anything further in the report, Councillor Curtin?
No, I think the recommendations give us plenty of room to manoeuvre. Just happy to go with the recommendations.
Anything further? Yes.
Supporting Councillor Curtin's motion to support the recommendation, but I just have one on that, I don't know if the order, in terms of the points around the additional MWLS above ground cover. So I guess my question is, it's got 0.9 there, I'm just understanding whether there's 6 points missing in between 2 and 9. If there is, it may explain further what I'm seeking, but I guess the above ground cover, so let me understand this right, is that you're noting that 0.9 that the other councils within the policy, you've presented those. Is that because there's other councils within that are not a part of that policy?
Correct, yeah. So just to confirm, that is below ground cover, sorry, there's an error in there. The MWLS group policy is actually the infrastructure below ground assets policy. Sorry. But yes, those are the councils that participate in that particular group policy. And we have different councils that we participate with for our above ground assets, which are just the Hawke's Bay TAs and us. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. All right, so can I ask for someone to move that the recommendations per the policy are accepted? Councillor Hokianga? Councillor McIntosh, second. Does anyone want to discuss the motion? No? All those in favour?
Aye.
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 None against? Motion carried. Right, thank you. So now we have the health and safety and wellbeing review, the management system. So who's presenting on that one?
Christy, and I've just messaged her. She's going to put it down.
done the minutes.
Yeah. Last one. Is anyone else warm in here?
I can
It's
turn
either
the air back on.
boiling or freezing in this room.
I'm always cold and I'm feeling warm, so the rest of you must be sweltering.
Turn the air back on.
There are two options and none
Yeah.
of them are ideal.
Wants to take 5 minutes, we'll go.
Yeah, shall we break for 5 minutes for a refreshment, breath of fresh air? Pippa, anything in particular you would like to highlight on the health and safety and wellbeing management system?
No, I think the paper speaks to itself, and so it's just to give you an overview of where we've come from, really, and where we're heading to. And it's good that it's underway, so we're pleased to have the document review in November, and we're preparing as a team for that to occur now, so.
Okay. So just in terms of making sure I've got it right, because I think we've dipped in and out of this topic a bit over a couple of years. So the council did have a tertiary risk, or a tertiary rating in terms of
Accreditation.
the accreditation through ACC. And maybe just so that others around the table are clear, because it's a little strange in it that it's an ACC thing, but it helps, or it previously helped the council to comply with the health and safety obligations, although those, I mean, they're separate things. ACC is not the same as health and safety. So maybe just to be clear, we're talking about health and safety, but previously an ACC standard accreditation was used to satisfy those health and safety or to make sure that the council was satisfying those health and safety obligations with that.
That's correct. So for many years, ACC ran a insurance discount program, which was the ACC Workplace Management Safety System. And under that, organisations could get anywhere upward of 10, 15 and 20% discount against their levies if they were at tertiary. So 20% for tertiary. And this organisation stayed at tertiary for a number of years. In 2017, ACC decided that they would step out of that program. The intention was, I worked for ACC for 25 years as a consultant, the intention of that program was to build health and safety capability in New Zealand, and it did that quite successfully. But in 2017, as an organisation, they made a decision that they would no longer pursue that standard, and that sort of left New Zealand business sector in a bit of a quandary, really, as to where they would move to next. And a number of organisations have maintained, as we did, for the period of time that we had the Crow desktop review in 2018. But a number of organisations, like ourselves, continue to use the same standard, which we have done. But in order to move progressively into another program, we went about, as the paper describes, a process to determine what sort of standard we were wanted to be accredited to. And because we have a number of our other programs in ISO 9000, it made natural sense.
So just to clarify, the Crow review that was done a few years ago, 2018, that was based on the ISO 45001 standards.
Some of the because they would have developed their own desktop criteria, but in saying that, some of the requirements in that were ISO 45000.
Yeah, okay. All right, and then you've done a review in November last year.
2022 against the ACC ANZ 4801, as we would have done, just to see where we were sitting. Now, that's against where all our processes sit, just to make sure that we were tracking as well as we would like to. So when we do the ISO 45000 review, there's likely to be recommendations, as there was back in 2017. So ACC audited in 2017, Crow came in 2018. Even though we were tertiary in 2017, Crow still found differences because it's a completely different standard. And so we are expecting that, and we'll build that into our next 3-year work plan.
Okay, so just to pick up on what Crow found in the report, it talks about there were areas that continued to mature, which I guess was euphemistically referring to issues that needed to be resolved. Risk management and contractor management. Has that now been addressed?
We're still maturing that.
Right.
So we have a really good contractor management process, but of course, obviously, post-cyclone, that has become exponentially larger than we would have had in the past. So we are working in that space, and we're continuing to have surveillance in there.
There's still things outstanding.
I wouldn't say they're outstanding, but in any health and safety system, there's always the ability to mature and review and make better. And so the system we have for contractors is a good system. We have a benchmark here at HBRC that if you are going to be a contractor, you have to be site-wise approved. Site-wise 2 years ago enabled companies to become 100% approved, so gold standard versus green standard, which is a very basic standard. So all of our contractors are required to do that before they come to work for us. We have a procurement team, albeit small, but they do a really good job. However, we're working now to improve the process because we have exponentially more contractors in a space with higher risk than we've ever had before. Yeah.
Okay, so just to go back, then there was the November review. Why was it done against the tertiary standard?
Because that's the standard we had at the time.
Even though the Crow report was based on the ISO 45001 standard?
That's correct.
Okay. My concern about this is that it was discontinued, the ACC regime was discontinued many years ago because it didn't, part of the reason, I'm sure ACC had its own reasons for the departure as well, but my understanding is a lot of it reflected the change in the workplace health and safety legislation that came in 2016. And I've been saying now, I think for a better part of 18 months, this stuff changed a long time ago, and the standards that are being applied are from the old regime.
That standard still exists in New Zealand because of the ACC partnership program. It's just that ACC stopped their program.
Yeah, but I think there seems to be an understanding that the ACC standards didn't reflect what's happening with the new health and safety system, and work cover has brought in the Safe Plus regime as one way for employers to be able to comply with their standards. I mean, people have different views on that, but I really want the organisation to move away from this old system and start implementing the new system, which is 5 years old, under the ISO standards. It would be then.
Well, that's the intention of the desktop review, and then we're moving into as you'll see from the back, at the back of the paper, it speaks to how we will move forward. So we've sought a lot of advice on this in terms of where we should have gone. We consulted with ELT. We looked at Safe Plus, and both organisations who we consulted with would probably not do it again because it doesn't really satisfy the actual need, which is why we've gone to ISO 45000. So that is the reason that we've moved to ISO 45000, and we will continue. That will be our standard going forward.
Okay. I think from my perspective, fantastic to move to 45001. It makes sense if you've got the other ISO standards in place across the organisation, as you've noted. The 3-year move, was that in the paper, was what you mentioned before, in terms of a 3-year process to get to that standard? I feel is too long, given how long this has been an issue for. But I guess that will depend on the nature of the recommendations that come from the desktop audit, right?
Correct, and we will be required to address all of the recommendations within 12 months, and then a conversation will be had with ELT as to the degree of whether they move to certification or whether we will have to go to an audit again within 12 months. So it won't be 2 years, it'll be 12 months. We have to satisfy the recommendations of the audit in order to move into the ISO 45001 framework.
I wonder if it would assist the committee that as we do this, I'm always really conscious of this, and being the PCBU for the organisation, I get regular metrics on incidents, controls and so on. Not suggesting we bring you those in quite that level of detail, but I think a summary along with incidents, which you're getting in the part 2 of this agenda, would be really useful for the committee, because that helps you understand where we're tracking, and I think that's
well, we have
it will be something we'll make sure we do for future agendas.
Likely, as we did with the Crow audit, we worked with Risk and Assurance, and we were tracked by them for every council meeting. So my thinking would be that we would follow the same process, and that those recommendations would go into a template that would be presented here in terms of progress made against recommendations, and they'll form the next part of the 3-year strategic plan and work plan that needs to be updated in 2024.
But we'll also make sure that those key metrics on incidents come to the committee.
Yeah, okay, and that, to your point, as the PCBU, you want to be complying with your health and safety obligations. That's my concern. That if these issues have been outstanding for such a long time now, and if something were to occur, that you're able to discharge that obligation.
Absolutely,
Does anyone else have questions, Councillor?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Look, and my question sort of dovetailed into that conversation. They were just about trying to get clarity for myself and maybe others in the committee about what of health and safety comes to this committee as opposed to others. So in terms of incident reporting, that goes to, I'm sure that goes to full council. I can't remember which committee it goes to. So we have, and so it makes sense for the benefit of our chair, who's not sitting on those councils, to get that information, and perfectly sensible for that to be just routed through this committee as well, I think. And I think that we've already landed there. So my interest, having clarified that, is to get some clarity about what, we have the overview of the system, and the system is evolving to the new standard, and I just want to have clarity about what we're expected to see, what that pipeline and the time frame of the system review that we're going to partake in an overview of. So it'd be nice to have a timeline of work that or outputs of this change that we can review, and know when to expect them.
So that's the 12 months I'm talking to. We have 12 months for any recommendations, and my understanding would be, again, that we would bring that through risk and assurance, as we have done in the past, via a report that will detail the recommendations and where they're at any stage. So you'll be able to look at those and say, well, that's been completed, and there will be timeframes in there, because some things we'll be able to do quite quickly, and other things might take a little bit of time.
Right, just so I'm clear, so towards the end of the paper, there's a table that sets out a 3-year, well, actually a 5-year program. So my understanding of that is that we need a full year, a cycle, to be able to review. So we adopt a standard, we go through a full year cycle, and then we review at the end of it. Is that the general concept?
So year 1 is the document review. Then year 2, 12 months, we have a full on-site audit. And then year 3, we do that again. And then we move to a 2-year cycle, which is a natural progression for audit programs.
Okay, so from here, we're going to be sitting here as a committee for a full year, not expecting to review anything. Is that the concept? Because that documentation is in process, or is there going to be the process of that review coming through this committee?
When is the desktop audit occurring?
November. Yeah.
So in the meeting after November, we will receive a copy of that report with management action items out of it.
Yeah. Marvellous, thank you.
And I suggested, Chair, that it might be useful as part of that to because I think it's really hard for members sitting around committees to get reports every now and then. I think a picture of what the health and safety framework looks like inside the organisation, and who does what and who discharges their roles, and then importantly what the role of governors is. Would be really useful as part of that. So you get the whole picture rather than that bit of detail. So I think if we could take that away, Leanne, as kind of the context for the next paper, to paint that view. And I know in previous councils, there's been real benefit in having elected members particularly being able to ask questions of outside expertise around kind of what their role is, because it's something that, if any of us get it wrong, it keeps us awake at night, and none of us want to. So happy to think about how we might frame that up for you for the next
that would be great. Any further questions? No? Councillor Hokianga, any further questions? No? Councillor Curtin, anything from you? No? Okay, can I have someone... We're happy with the recommendations around this then?
Happy to move.
Thank you. Second, from Hokianga. Any further discussion? No. All those in favour?
Aye. Aye.
Those against? Motion carried. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Kirsty.
Thanks, Kirsty.
Okay, then we have the... Moving into public excluded. So we have, if I just go back up to the top, we have several items noted on the agenda to move into public excluded now. Can we just clarify the reasons for that so it's clear?
Right, through you, Chair. There are 4 items to be discussed in public excluded if we pass those resolutions. So for the minutes, it's based on the reasons why the meeting agenda items were considered in public excluded, which were for the protection of persons, officers, etc., from improper pressure or harassment, which is section 7.2 if II, and also to prevent the disclosure or use of official information for improper gain or improper advantage, and that is section 7.2J. And there was also the use of section 7.2E, which was to avoid prejudice to measures that prevent or mitigate loss to members of the public. Risk maturity refresh is under sections 7.2CII and 7.2J. The first of those, 7.2C, is because it's subject to an obligation of confidence. We will also be asked to pass a resolution that David Nalder stay in the public excluded session as subject matter expert for that item. For the incident reports, it is all around the 7.2F, again, to protect employees and others from harassment and to mitigate loss to members of the public. And the internal assurance dashboards, again, the 7.2F, E, mitigate loss, and J, to prevent the disclosure or use of official information for improper gain or improper advantage. So if members of the committee are okay with those, we can have the same mover, seconder for all 4 of them if you like.
Yeah, I'll move them.
Okay.
Including presence of David.
Okay.
Councillor Harding can second. All those in favour?
Could I just speak to the motion?
Yes.
No, please. I just wanted to note the tension in risk management between preserving the systems that we operate against external intervention when that can become a problem versus the power of sunlight as a disinfectant. I just wanted to put that on the record that that's the way that I look at this, and that and I think it's right, particularly for this committee, to look very closely at every incidence when there is a recommendation or where we choose to go into public excluded, and do that as absolutely sparingly as possible, with that concept in mind that disclosure is the best thing unless there's a really good reason not to. And I think we get that, but I just wanted to table that. Thank you.
And I think in this particular scenario, we couldn't have the full debate that we need to have with David going into some of those issues that are particularly sensitive. We couldn't extract that little bit out to have the rest of the conversation in a full forum. We need to have the conversation wholly in a public excluded scenario. And then as the circumstances permit, that whole framework will become part of discussions as we move forward. And I wouldn't imagine that would generally need to be within the public exclusion
Primarily, the reason around this today is not only the full and frank discussion with David, but there's actually two risks that we've taken a deep dive on in here today, one of which is cyber security and the other is data integrity systems. Now, we do not want the public to understand, anyone outside of this organisation to understand what our key cyber controls are and or have access to that information. So primarily it is driven today based on those two risks that we're deep diving, and also the privacy incident that we had, that we reported through to the Comcom was under public excluded originally, and this is just an update to that. So that's primarily the rationale supporting the decision.
Can I just make one note, and that is that the ability to move into public excluded does not include the reason for free and frank expression.
No.
That can't be used. So that's not one of the reasons we're going.
Yeah. It was more in the context of the particular subjects that we need to have full and frank discussions on these more sensitive subjects, not full and frank discussion generally, not at all. Okay, so are we happy to vote on that if no one else has any further discussions on that motion? No? So all those in favour?
Aye.
Aye. Those against? Oh wait, Councillor Curtin, were you in favour?
Yeah.
Yes, good. I looked at you just. Okay, thank you everyone. So excluded now.